It has been a long time since I have recorded. Welcome to Food for Thought, providing real-world inspiration for living compassionately, sustainably, and healthfully for humankind, animal kind, and the ecosystems we all depend on. Thanks for listening. If you're new, thanks for listening. If you've been listening for years, we are in our 18th year of Food for Thought. Today's episode is Popular Plant-Based Foods with Religious Roots, How Religions Have Shaped the Foods We Eat. Hi, everyone. I can't believe how long it's been. It's possibly the longest I've ever taken between episodes. I was looking back at the last episode, which was about losing Charlie, and it probably looks like I just, fell off the face of the earth after that. But there have just been different reasons. I was hosting a joyful vegan trip in France that ended in Bordeaux. And then my husband and I, after hosting the group, we went off on our own to Ile de Ré, which is a little island off the west coast of France. Highly recommended. If you're looking for a place to vacation in France, it's not car free, but it was just really made for bikes. So we just parked our car for 2 days, 2.5 days, and we just cycled around the island. So highly recommend it. Ile de Ré is what it's called. So we enjoyed some R&R together, alone, just the two of us, which was really nice since we do so many trips where we're with 20 other people. And also it was really special because it's where his ancestors lived before his great whoever left in the 1600s to come to North America, to French Canada. And it was pretty awesome. We went to a church where there's a plaque to his ancestor, two of them, they were brothers who left to go to Quebec. And we went to the cemetery. It was really lovely to see kind of the origins of my husband's father's side. And then there's a whole other story of my husband's father's mother's side, also in France. But that's for another time. That's in Montpellier, which is a different part of France. But now you can see the origins of Goudreau in his name and in my name. Then we spent a few days in Brittany to celebrate a friend's 50th birthday with other friends, and it was absolutely lovely. So I have lots to share with you, and I will be doing so here. I will also be doing so on Substack, and I'm also doing more on YouTube. So please don't forget to get over to my Substack. I definitely have lost subscribers from Patreon. I was willing to do it. So, everything has kind of halved probably the income from Patreon, but I'm just enjoying being over on Substack and having a home to write and to provide inspiration. One of the things I do on Substack is every Friday, I do what's called Friday Musings, and I just kind of share what I'm loving that week, things I'm reading, things I'm listening to, things I'm learning, things I'm watching. That's just one of the things, but there's lots and lots over there. The Substack is called Compassion in Action, but you could just go find me if you just search for me on Substack. And I'm going to be adding a second Substack, drum roll, because I really want a place for all of my animology content to live. So I think I'm going to be doing a second Substack called Animology, but that's all over there. So go subscribe. You can be a free subscriber, but you can also be a paid subscriber if you want to replace your Patreon and also just continue supporting this work on the podcast, the work that I'm doing over on Substack, etc. I also have a lot to share because we were in Japan in April where we hosted a trip, and I've been working on some videos, like actual long form videos for YouTube on various foods and specifically on a particular food I mentioned in a recent podcast episode about Japanese cuisine, and that dish is called okonomiyaki. And so I'm working on a lot of content. I'm really enjoying it. I hope people see it because, of course, that's what I'm constantly dealing with. But I think everyone's dealing with that. There's so much out there and the algorithms are making it hard for the people who want to hear from you to actually hear from you. So I'm doing my best, but I'm having fun. My hope with this video for YouTube, this video on okonomiyaki, is to create the first all-vegan deep dive on the regional differences of okonomiyaki, because they're like okonomiyaki in Osaka is different than okonomiyaki in Tokyo, versus Kyoto versus Hiroshima. So I know that that doesn't mean anything to you if you don't know what okonomiyaki is, but trust me, it's going to be really fun, and I'm working on it. As I was going into my deep dive of writing and editing and researching and putting all the footage together for the video, I thought, well, I could cut 2 carrots with 1 knife and share the same information here on the podcast. But then I hesitated. Apparently, I am not capable of making things easy for myself, because it really would have been easy to just take what I've written for the video and share it with you here on the podcast. But I just don't think the content necessarily easily transfers over to audio, because okonomiyaki, it's a dish. It's a visual dish. I want you to see the different textures and the regional nuances and the different ways it's made and with different foods. So I just felt like without the visuals, I'd be cheating and making it easy for myself. So of course, I'm not capable of doing that. So as I was researching the okonomiyaki, though, one of the things that occurred to me is that it actually could still be in a podcast episode as part of a larger story. And it was the inspiration for today's episode. So it turns out this dish, okonomiyaki, which you can go listen to a little bit about it if you listen to the episode on Japanese cuisine that I did a couple months ago, just type it in. But it turns out this dish, like so many other dishes we know and love, dishes, recipes, foods, etc., has religious origins tied to meat abstention, abstaining from meat and dairy and eggs, this time within the Buddhist tradition. Now, I've mentioned before how Christian practices around giving up meat, specifically around Lent and Advent, but also around other days in the Christian liturgical calendar, led to the creation of foods that came about because people were abstaining from meat, dairy, and eggs during different periods of time throughout the year. And so I've talked about pretzels, I've talked about tempura. And in fact, if you go over to my Substack, you will find an actual series that I did on all the different foods, specifically around Lent and Easter, that grew out of, and when I say foods, I mean popular foods that we know and love today, that grew out of this tradition of abstaining from meat, dairy, and eggs. And so I thought, I've mentioned this hither and thither, but I thought it would be a perfect topic for an entire episode. Because across the world's religions, the choice to abstain from animal products, whether for a day or a season or a lifetime, has inspired a wide range of beloved dishes that we enjoy in the popular culture. Fasting, as it's often called, but fasting doesn't necessarily mean abstaining from all foods, right? We think of fasting as, not eating anything at all, but that's not really what it has meant historically. Historically, it usually refers to abstaining from certain foods, especially animal products. And so, for instance, Christians observe Lent, which is a period of self-discipline that can include giving up things like sugar or social media, or more traditionally, animal-based meat, fish, and historically, all animal products. There's lots to say about that. And I have said it in other mediums, including this podcast. Advent, too, has historically involved a form of fasting, including abstaining from meat. It's less commonly practiced today to abstain from animal products during Advent, but we have a lot of foods that came from Advent because of when it was a practice, when it was more common. But the point is, both seasons reflect how the Christian liturgical calendar has long asked its followers, its congregants, to pause, to reflect, and to abstain, often from animal products. In Judaism, there are several fast days throughout the year, but the most significant is Yom Kippur. It's a 25-hour fast observed by adults and teens over 13, unless they're medically exempt, during which time no food or drink is consumed, while the focus is on prayer and atonement. Once the fast is over, families and communities gather to break it together. But there are other foods from other holidays that are part of the ritual symbolism in Judaism that we're going to talk about today, because they are now part of the popular imagination. Of course, Ramadan is the most well-known fasting period in Islam. For 1 month, Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. each day, starting the day with a light pre-dawn meal, and then they end it with a celebratory evening meal. And one of the things that came out of that are some foods for when they break the fast that we still enjoy today. So we'll talk about that. Buddhism incorporates fasting more consistently throughout the year, often following a plant-based diet. Whether you're a monk or a nun or someone who's practicing Buddhism and following Buddhist principles, it's very common to abstain from especially animal flesh, but also animal fluids as well. So we'll talk about that. Then there's the Daniel fast, which is rooted in the Hebrew Bible. It's a 21-day period where only fruits and vegetables and water are consumed, essentially a spiritual cleanse that resembles pretty much a plant-based diet. Then you have Greek Orthodox Christians who have an extensive fasting tradition that spans around 200 days each year. And so during major holidays like Nativity and Lent and Assumption, they abstain from meat, dairy, olive oil, alcohol, particularly on Wednesdays and Fridays, and their meals center around vegetables and legumes and bread and fruits and nuts. And then you have Coptic Christians in Egypt and Ethiopian Orthodox Christians who observe extensive fasting periods as well, among the most rigorous of any religious group. And these can also total about 200 days a year. And in fact, Ethiopian Orthodox Christians abstain from all animal products. So they're effectively following a plant-based vegan diet as part of their spiritual practice. And I haven't even talked about kind of ancient, vegetarianism and meat abstention. We've talked about it on the podcast over 18 years. You can go find it somewhere in this podcast. But today we're going to be talking about especially these Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so as I started digging deeper into how abstaining from animal products for religious reasons has shaped the foods we eat today, it was just so exciting to come up with all of these foods. Now, I'm not talking about all of the foods people eat during these kinds of fasts, during this abstention. There are a million things, right? It's just whatever we eat being vegan. What I'm talking about are specifically kind of meals, dishes, recipes that came out of these periods of abstaining from meat, dairy, and eggs. They were foundational to the religion at hand, and now they're part of popular culture. That I think is really interesting. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I think it's really important to look at how religious traditions have played such a significant role in shaping the development of many familiar dishes. I think this matters because I think it continues to legitimize plant-based eating as something deeply rooted in cultural and historical human tradition. It's not a fad. It's not a modern invention. And even if you are atheist or you consider yourself pagan or you are agnostic, it doesn't matter. The point is millions and millions and millions of people are either Christian or Muslim or Jewish, and they're practicing these things we're talking about. But more than that, there are millions and millions and millions of us who are enjoying these foods that came out of these religious traditions. They're tied into our human culture. And I think it's helpful. I think it's important because it reminds us that meatless eating has long been a meaningful, creative, essential part of the human experience, shaped by values, shaped by ethics, shaped by necessity. And by centering these stories in our collective memory, I think we not only reclaim a rich legacy, I think we also challenge the idea that animal products have to sit at the center of every meal, or that they have always sat at the center of every meal. Neither are true. We overemphasize how much of a role animal products have played in our history. And I want to just keep unpacking that, and I want to keep debunking that. So today we're going to explore some of the most beloved dishes that were born out of religious customs around abstaining from meat. And we're going to start with a food that everyone knows, that is ancient, whose story began 2,000 years ago in the monasteries of China, which suffers today from a public relations problem, especially in the West, even though most people know it. And if they don't like it, it's because they probably didn't have it prepared very well. And that food is tofu. Tofu's story begins in China, where it was developed over 2,000 years ago during the Han Dynasty. It's possibly by accident that it happened. No one really knows for sure, when freshly made soy milk was mixed with nagari, which is a salt coagulant. It's derived from seawater, and it caused it to curdle, because that's all tofu is. If you know how dairy-based cheese is made, you know how tofu is made. You have a milk and you add a coagulant and it changes texture. That's basically what tofu is, just like what cheese is. In the case of tofu, it's soy milk that has a coagulant, which is a very common coagulant, is nagari, which is salt water, seawater-ish. It's a salt made from seawater, and it causes curdling. And then you get those curds that you separate from the whey. The curds are the solids, and the whey is the liquid. And you've got tofu, and you press it, and you've got this wonderful block that you can then flavor and cook any way. So over time, tofu became a central ingredient in Chinese cooking, and especially in Buddhist temple cuisine, where it served as a vital plant-based protein in a diet that avoided animal flesh. So the Buddhist temple cuisine would have started in China and then moved around the east, and then eventually came west. It's adaptable, it was mild, it was nourishing, it was filling, and all of that made it indispensable, not just there in China, but across the region. So in Korea, tofu, which is called dubu, became a staple, and it became valued in both everyday cooking, but also in temple meals. And then it moved on to Japan. So in the Nara period, if you're interested in Japanese history, you can go back to one of the episodes I did on Japanese cuisine, because I talked about the history of vegetarianism in Japan. And I talked about the Nara period, which is from in the 700s AD, the 700s. And during that time, which is a time when you had a huge transmission of Chinese religion, philosophy, and cuisine coming into Japan, tofu was one of those things. The Japanese monks were inspired by this food, who were already practicing shojin ryori, which is the traditional vegan cuisine of Buddhist temples, and tofu fit perfectly into that philosophy of nonviolence and mindfulness and simplicity. Now, today, I wouldn't say that shojin ryori is widely embraced by the general population. We do enjoy shojin cuisine in temples on our trips. And if you are in Japan on your own, I do recommend it, because it is a very unique cuisine. It is and always has been plant-based, completely vegan, no animal products. But elements from this temple cuisine, especially tofu, and we'll talk about another one as well, have permeated Japanese food culture. At first, tofu was confined mostly to temple life, but over time it gained popularity among the elite and samurai classes who valued its health benefits and its versatility. But by the Edo period, which was 1603 to 1868, tofu had become a household staple, and it started showing up in shops, in cities, and in towns. So it is a food that evolved from a sacred temple food to an everyday, essential, versatile, protein-rich food, versatile enough to be grilled and fried and simmered and served cold and all the things. So that journey from China to Japan is just one example of how religious values, in this case, Buddhist values of nonviolence and mindfulness, shaped not only religious practice, but entire culinary traditions. And Buddhist traditions didn't just introduce tofu as we know it, as that block. They inspired entirely different variations of it that are still enjoyed today in temple cuisine, but also in the larger population. One of them is incredibly popular today, and I would say is very popular on YouTube, which is wonderful because you find people raving about it. And I've been raving about it for decades, but now it's very trendy, which is great. And that's koyu-tofu. And koyu-tofu was developed by monks as a way to preserve tofu in the freezing mountain air. And once rehydrated, it transforms into a spongy, chewy texture. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about tofu that you freeze and then you thaw. That's what koya tofu is. It's been used for thousands of years by monks to preserve that tofu. And so what you have is that, frozen block that I highly recommend trying. If you've never had frozen thawed tofu, koya tofu, it's so wonderful. I think it's more popular today than it certainly was when I was first talking about it a couple decades ago. You freeze the tofu, whether it's in a vacuum packed plastic packaging or whether it's in a tub of water, just throw it right in the freezer. So there's tofu and it's on sale, grab it, put it in your freezer. Like anything, don't keep it in there longer than 6 months because you're just going to forget about it. You're not going to use it, but thaw it on the counter on a towel and then squeeze out all the water from that tofu block. It'll be like a sponge. And now you have this wonderful chewy texture that is able to soak up any marinade you put into it. And I say marinade, I mean also if you squeeze out that water and you throw it into a pasta sauce, tomato sauce, chili sauce, whatever, you get this wonderful chewy texture that's very reminiscent of animal flesh in the sense that we like chewy. Chewy is good. And it soaks up all the flavor. But also what it does is, it changes the texture, changes the ability to absorb flavor. And I love it. It's one of my favorite ways to prepare tofu. So that's something that came out of Buddhist monasteries as well. Another variation is less known, but I'm still going to include it. We do have it in our Shojin cuisine. Maybe you've made it at home. Maybe you've seen some YouTubers making it. We do include it. In fact, we have a cooking class when we were in Kanazawa as part of our joyful vegan trip. And in the cooking class, everyone learns how to make this. And it's called goma tofu. I think you're getting the sense that tofu is also another word for tofu. In the East, it would have been called tofu. We say tofu. But goma tofu is, it's a custard-like dish. It's not made from soybeans. So even though this is saying tofu, goma meaning sesame, and tofu meaning tofu, it's not actually tofu as we know it made from soybeans or soy milk. It's actually made from sesame paste, kind of think of like a tamari, and kuzu starch, so like a cornstarch. And it is still served in formal kaiseki meals. Like the kaiseki meal is a very formal, traditional, multi-course Japanese dinner. It's considered the pinnacle of Japanese haute cuisine. And we experience that. One of our meals is a kaiseki restaurant that does an incredible plant-based meal for us. And you do not find a lot of vegan kaiseki meals. So we work with, you won't find it if you're on your own. I'm going to tell you right now, but we make it happen because that's what we do on our trips. So it's served, the goma tofu, as part of a kaiseki meal, but it's also something you can make at home. It's really lovely. It has a strong sesame flavor. It has the texture of soft tofu. So it kind of resembles a silken kind of tofu. It's kind of like a pudding. Think of it like a pudding. So it's basically like a sesame pudding, and it's lovely and easy to make. So the kuzu starch that I mentioned, it's like a cornstarch. So just like if you're making, a custard, with sugar and milk, you would add a starch to make it thick, to set it up, and there you go. There's your pudding. So that's what goma tofu is. Then you have another tofu-based dish that I do not doubt you have seen. You may not have ordered it, but I bet you have if you have ever been to a sushi restaurant, and that's inari, Inari. And that is like tofu skin that has rice inside of that skin. So they're like little pockets of rice inside the skin of fried tofu. And it's really delicious. It's very simple, but it's often in sushi restaurants. You will find it also in temple cuisine. You will also find it in any convenience store. You'll find it in bento boxes. You'll find it in home kitchens. You'll find it in shrines and during festivals. So it's a very popular food in Japan now, also coming out of the tradition of tofu, coming out of Buddhism. And I highly recommend it if you are on your own and you're vegan or you're not, and you're looking for food and plant-based options. You can find inari in like any convenience store. It's very simple. Tofu skin, rice inside, and it's really delicious. The name inari, there's a little bit of an etymology here, kind of, a little bit. Okay, it's not an animology, but it's animal related because we did see this when we were in some of the shrines. So inari comes from Inari Okami, which is the Shinto deity. Shintoism is the traditional religion of Japan before Buddhism came in from China. So Inari Okami is the Shinto deity of rice and prosperity. And foxes are said to be Inari's messengers because they love fried tofu. So that's why inari became a traditional offering at shrines and festivals. And you will see foxes often, and at entrances to shrines. So a little bit of an animal connection there. And there were some shrines that we went to and I saw foxes, and it's because they love Inari and they're the messengers of the gods. So there you go. So that's Inari. And then another food that came out of tofu, that came out of soy milk, that came out of monasteries is yuba, also known as tofu skin. If you have never had yuba, I highly recommend it. It's become more popular. I would say it's kind of become a bit trendy. I would say people who say, I don't like tofu, possibly have had yuba, or they're more open to trying yuba. I don't know why they're more open to trying something that's called skin, but I think tofu has just gotten a bad rap. And oh gosh, I would love to die knowing that people have a different perspective about tofu. I'm trying. I know other people are trying. I love tofu so much. I love it so much. So yuba is tofu skin. It's kind of like if you've ever made pudding and you leave it uncovered when it's setting up and it forms a skin. That's what happens that's what yuba is. It's soy milk that's heated and a thin skin rises to the surface, and that skin is lifted off, dried, and then either used fresh or it's rehydrated later. It's incredibly versatile. It's really chewy, delicious. Also just takes on whatever flavor you add. I've talked about Hodo soy. I think Hodo soy now, which started here in Oakland, California, has international distribution. And they have incredible yuba. So I think you could find it like in Whole Foods or so. So seek out yuba if you haven't tried it yet, or if you've tried it, just go have some. It's fantastic. Now, there's very little documentation about the early history of yuba. It likely originated in China, where the earliest known mention appears in a 1695 text describing the skin that forms on boiling soy milk. And then China and Taiwan and Hong Kong, they became regions where yuba became most widely used. As for Japan, it's unclear exactly when yuba arrived. Some say as early as the 10th century via those Chinese Buddhist monks. Others believe Japanese monks brought it back from China in the early 13th century. Either way, Kyoto became the heart of yuba production in Japan. That's where most of the monasteries were. That's where you'll find a lot of plant-based cuisine, temple cuisine in Kyoto. And so it remains there today because it became central to temple cuisine and these refined kaiseki meals. Outside of Asia, tofu eventually made its way to the West, gaining popularity in the United States during the natural food movement of the 1960s and 70s. I think that's partly why it has a bad rap. I think it's connected with this health movement, this kind of hippie health movement. And I think we haven't really separated it from that. And I think that's one of the reasons it has really poor PR. Thanks in part to George Osawa, he was the founder of the macrobiotic movement. Tofu and other traditional soy-based foods were introduced to Americans, but very health-conscious Americans who were looking for alternatives to animal flesh. So it kind of became embraced by the counterculture as a symbol of health and nonviolence, and I think that's why it's still considered hippie food. And that image still lingers as part of Western culture. I think it tends to be misunderstood or dismissed or thought as being disgusting, which, I just think if you think that, you either haven't had tofu or it hasn't been prepared for you properly. So I just want to change that. But in Japan and Korea and China and across Asia, millions and millions and millions of people eat tofu. It has a very different reputation, whether it's pressed, whether it's aged, whether it's fried, whether it's fermented, whether it's simmered, whether it's whatever. It's served in countless regional dishes, thanks to plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, whatever, Buddhist monks. And tofu wasn't the only innovation that came out of those temple kitchens. Another food we know and love today, especially if you're vegetarian or vegan or plant-based, can also be traced back to Chinese monks over 1,500 years ago, and that is seitan. 1,500 years ago, seitan was created. Just to put that in perspective, that's around the year 500. That's when like the Western Roman Empire had already fallen. That was like the mid 400s. The Byzantine Empire was flourishing under Emperor Justinian I, who reigned in the mid 500s. He's the one who commissioned the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, an architectural marvel that stands today, still today. In the Americas, the Maya civilization was thriving. So that's just like what was happening when seitan was invented. So long before it showed up in vegan cookbooks or on, health food store shelves, seitan was invented by Chinese Buddhist monks as a way to adhere to their plant-based diet. They rinsed wheat dough to remove the starch, and they were left with a dense, chewy protein. That's why it's just gluten. It's just the gluten. And that's what we call today wheat meat, seitan. Some people call it mock meat. I don't like that term. As you know, I'd prefer grain-based meat, plant-based meat, seitan. Seitan. The word seitan was coined in Japan in the 1960s by that same George Osawa, who was the founder of the macrobiotic movement I mentioned earlier. The food itself, wheat gluten, has much older origins in Chinese Buddhist cuisine, but the name is very modern. In Japanese, seitan, again, coined by George Osawa, who's Japanese, that's not his, I think he changed his name, but it means made of protein. Sei, which is SEI, means life, and tan, or made, creation, created, and then tan means, it's short for tempaku, which means protein. So it just means made of protein. And Chinese Buddhist monks had been using this wheat gluten for centuries as an alternative to animal flesh. And they called it mianjin. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in Mandarin, but that literally translates to wheat muscle or flour, flour, tendon. Talk about words evoking an experience. I love that. So wheat muscle or flour tendon is what it would have been called in China. And again, it made its way to Japan and it became part of temple cuisine there as well. But it was Chinese monks who basically started seitan, created seitan, invented seitan, however you want to characterize it, 1,500 years ago. Before we leave our ancient Buddhist monks and their now trendy foods that we can thank them for, let's talk about one more. One of my favorite foods in Japan, and that is okonomiyaki. Now, I realize I framed this episode around religiously inspired dishes that have entered the popular imagination. I'm taking a little creative license here because I don't think it's widely known outside of Japan, but it's my podcast and I can do what I want. More importantly, I want to get you excited about this food. Maybe you'll join me over on Substack because I'm going to be talking about it more over there. For my paid subscribers, I'm going to be doing a demonstration because I'm actually playing with making it at home myself. And maybe you'll join me in Japan in 2026 because we do have our fill of okonomiyaki because it's so delicious. But okonomiyaki is widely eaten in Japan. Now, it's considered a bit of a modern dish today, but its origins go back much farther. So further, I think further is more grammatically correct. So okonomiyaki, it's a savory Japanese pancake that evolved from earlier pancake-like dishes. I'm going to be honest. Pancakes, I've read books on pancakes. Like pancakes go back thousands of years in every culture. So do, flatbreads, right? And they're different. But this kind of idea of like something that's very basic, it's flour-based, there's some kind of leavening, it could be yeast, it could be baking powder, whatever. That's a very common thing in most cultures. And so you can think of like crepes in, France. You could think of the pancakes we know today in the United States. There's so many different variations of it. And Japan had their own as well. And the origins of okonomiyaki would have been a very simple, sweet crepe dating back to that Edo period. This is 1603 to 1868 again. And that was a dish called funoyaki. So it was just a sweet crepe. And it was, I mean, it would be very familiar to you if you have ever had a crepe. So it's a very simple pancake that is believed to be an early precursor to okonomiyaki. It was traditionally served during tea ceremonies, and it's known for its very simple preparation: wheat, water, and sake, topped with sweet miso and rolled. That was it. That was made by monks in Kyoto. Funo yaki. It was entirely plant-based. It came from Shojin Ryori, this Buddhist temple cuisine, which avoided all animal products. And that word funo yaki combines fu, which just means wheat gluten, and yaki, which means grilled. Now, you are familiar with yaki. You can hear it in okonomiyaki. You can hear it in funoyaki. You can hear it in teriyaki. If you've ever had teriyaki sauce, yaki just means grilled. And so the earliest forms of okonomiyaki is believed to be funoyaki, and they were pretty much plant-based, pretty much vegan. As Western influences grew in Japan in the early 20th century, you have something called yoshikuyaki. Okay, again, you can hear the yaki again. Still a flour-based pancake, but now with ingredients like cabbage, sauces, and sometimes chicken's eggs. Yoshikuyaki combines yo, which is Western, shoku, which is food, and yaki, which is grilled. So it means Western style grilled food. It was inexpensive, it was customizable, and it was often meatless during especially wartime shortages. Over time, this adaptable dish evolved into what we now call okonomiyaki. Okonomi means as you like, and yaki means, yes, grilled. So it's literally grilled as you like it, and that reflects its versatile nature. After World War II, okonomiyaki became more substantial, and surprise, surprise, animal-based meat from land animals, aquatic animals, and eggs from chickens were added as they became available, because as countries get richer, they add animal products, and they become the norm because they're really expensive to produce, so you need money for them. Despite our subsidies for animal products, they are still considered expensive because it's very expensive in all the ways we measure cost to bring animals into this world, raise them, and then kill them. So this shift in adding animal products to this, what was once a very basic plant-based crepe, reflects the rising prosperity in Japan. And so suffice it to say, okonomiyaki began as a plant-based crepe as part of Buddhist tea ceremonies and only later evolved into the meat and seafood-heavy version we see today. The term okonomiyaki first appeared in Osaka in the 1930s. As wheat became more common in Japan's food economy, new wheat-based dishes began to emerge. So you have the gyoza, the dumplings, you have noodles like soba. Soba would have been buckwheat, but you have udon and ramen, and eventually you have okonomiyaki. So this pancake became very popular. And sadly, that meant people started adding different ingredients, many of them animal-based. So the As You Like It pancake was born because, by its nature, it's this very versatile pancake. And so okonomiyaki worked its way into local food culture, not just in Osaka, but also in Hiroshima, as well as Kyoto, as well as Tokyo, each city putting its own spin on the dish. And it really was considered a street food. And that's what my video is going to feature. So I won't bore you here with all of the details about the differences, but suffice it to say, I can recommend some of the places to go in each of these cities. This is what's going to be in the Substack as part of my travel series. So get over on Substack, but also it'll be in that video I make. And of course, if you want to join me in Japan, you can enjoy as much okonomiyaki as you want, because we go to places that do have vegan options on the menu. Like I said, I will recommend some of these in the travel series on Substack, but you can find them also if you went to Happy Cow. And it's just such a fun food. It's just such a fun food. It's so delicious. And I don't know if I have my favorite yet. I haven't decided which one's my favorite, whether it's the one from Osaka or the one from Kyoto or the one from Hiroshima. I have an idea, but that will be in the video. So that is that. Our next dish has roots in both Buddhist culinary traditions and Christian Portuguese influences. And you've probably heard me talk about this if you follow me on social media, and that's tempura. This is an iconic Japanese dish of lightly battered and fried vegetables that traces back to the 16th century when Portuguese missionaries and traders brought deep frying techniques to Japan, most notably through a dish that in Portuguese is called little fish of the garden, that was made from green beans fried in batter because they were abstaining from animal products, the Portuguese Christians, as part of Lent. And so the word tempura likely comes from the Latin tempora, so Tempora, referring to Christian fasting days when meat was avoided, animal meat in particular. So Japanese cooks quickly adapted this method. They refined it into something uniquely their own, which is what the Japanese do. We see this in so many instances. And they just used a very simple batter of flour and water and created a lighter, crispier texture than the Portuguese original. During that Edo period, again, 1603 to 1868, tempura took off as a popular street food, especially in Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo. And of course, you can find it everywhere you go. Now, in every restaurant around the world, including in sushi restaurants, you will find it everywhere you go. And that is thanks to Portuguese Christians who were trading with the Japanese, or also there were missionaries there as well. So let's segue to foods from Christianity that came about because of the practice of abstaining from meat for religious purposes. Basically, tempura would be our first. And we have many others. Like I said, go to the Substack series called The Food History of Easter and Passover through a plant-based lens, because you can find so many of the foods I'm going to talk about. And I also have recipes for some of them. And we're going to start with, who doesn't love pretzels? Yes, pretzels. In medieval Europe, the Christian church profoundly shaped everyday diets through strict fasting periods like Lent, like Advent, like what are called Ember Days, which were seasonal days of fasting, prayer, and reflection that occurred several times a year. And these Ember Days in particular, they marked the transitions between seasons, and they reinforced this rhythm of spiritual discipline and agricultural gratitude. So we've talked about this a bit in episodes I've done on Advent and Lent, but basically at this time, believers abstained from all animal products, meat, dairy, and eggs. So pretzels were invented by monks around the 7th century. I said 7th century, in the 600s. And they were egg and dairy free by design to make them ideal for Lent. Allegedly, this might be apocryphal, but allegedly their signature twisted shape symbolized hands in prayer, and the 3 holes were said to represent the Holy Trinity. I don't know if that's true, but whether or not it is, pretzels became both sustenance and a religious symbol. And we even have evidence of that because it appeared in manuscripts like the Hortus Deliciarum, Garden of Delights is what that's translated to from Latin. It was an illuminated manuscript compiled between 1167 and 1185 by an abbess in Alsace. And it was created, this whole manuscript, as an educational resource for the young women in her convent. It blended theology and philosophy and literature and music and visual art. It's one of the earliest encyclopedias known to be authored by a woman. Now, among its many detailed illustrations, it is an illuminated manuscript, illuminated referring to illustrations, is one of the earliest known depictions of a pretzel. And you can see it on the table. There's a scene showing a banquet or a monastic meal, and pretzels are there on the table. And you can see their little distinctive looped shape. And so we've got this really rare visual evidence of the pretzel's early presence in European monastic life. You can see a picture over on my Substack on the article on pretzels, and you can also find my recipe for pretzels there. I have a recipe for pretzels in the Joy of Vegan Baking. I think there's also one in one of my on-demand classes. But you can find that recipe over on Substack. Now, over the centuries, pretzels evolved from this very humble Lenten fare into everything from street food to bar snacks. But their origins are plant-based and firmly tied to centuries-old Christian fasting traditions where congregants abstained from eating animal products. And speaking of Lenten foods, let's talk about another favorite flour-based food. And I kind of alluded to them earlier, and that's pancakes. Pancakes. Now, one of the most familiar associations, like religious holiday associations with pancakes, is Shrove Tuesday, which is also called Pancake Day. Shrove Tuesday is celebrated in many countries, especially those with Christian roots. In the UK and Ireland, Shrove Tuesday is known as Pancake Day. In the US, Shrove Tuesday overlaps with Mardi Gras, which is most famous in New Orleans, of course, and that refers to Fat Tuesday. These are all related. France, Italy, and Brazil would celebrate Pancake Day or Shrove Tuesday or Mardi Gras as part of Carnival. Remember, we talked about Carnival coming from the word for carne, meat, and vale, it's coming from the Latin word vale, meaning leaving off. It's leaving off meat. That's what carnival is. And so in all of these cases, it was what you ate as the last day of indulgence before Lent begins on Ash Wednesday. And at the time, it's true, pancakes would have been made with some animal products. That's partly why they were eating this before they were fasting, because there would have been some animal products like dairy-based butter and milk. But that's not all. Pancakes are, the history of pancakes is long and varied, and not all pancakes historically were made with animal products. And of course today, I have a fabulous recipe that I use all the time from the Joy of Vegan Baking. There's no animal products. It's not necessary at all. But let's get back to the relationship between pancakes and religion. The word shrove, so Shrove Tuesday, that comes from the English verb to shrive, which we don't really say a lot today, meaning to confess sins. So it's the past tense of to shrive. So traditionally, this was the day to receive absolution in preparation for Lent. This is something I did growing up Catholic, a time of physical and spiritual purification through prayer and penance and abstaining from animal products. That's what Lent was. Easter, even though we think of Christmas, I think Christmas obviously became much more international and less religious. Easter is one of the high holy holidays in Christianity. And so Lent, in preparation for Easter, was a very, very sacred time. Still is for millions of people. Now, naturally, a final celebratory feast emerged to use up rich ingredients like animal-based butter, chicken's eggs, and you have the tradition of pancakes for that reason. No one exactly knows why pancakes became the star of the British version of this day, like why it's called Pancake Day, but it was the opportunity to kind of clear out the pantry before the Lenten fast. So that's what we have today. I know I'm stretching it a bit, I think, with pancakes a little bit, because unlike with pretzels, I'm not saying pancakes originated as Lent-related food. It wasn't part of the fast. It was just previous to the fast. And then pretzels spread around the globe. I'm not saying pancakes started in the Lenten tradition and then spread around the globe, but they have long been tied to celebration across various religious traditions. So I felt like it was fitting for today's episode. And again, it's my podcast. I can do what I want. So Shrove Tuesday is called Pancake Day. So I just felt like it really fit in with today's theme. So there you have it. Another kind of similar recipe, also flour-based, that kind of comes out of the same tradition, are hot cross buns. Now, the origins of hot cross buns are layered and complex, with roots that seem to predate Christianity. If you look up the history of hot cross buns, you're going to find a lot that might have to do with ancient Britain, where the Saxons are believed to have baked buns marked with a cross during spring festivals, honoring the goddess of dawn and fertility, whose name is Eustra. That's where the word Easter comes from, allegedly. And as with many pre-Christian traditions, the church later adopted these traditions and then reinterpreted these customs. And so by the 12th century, the cross on the buns takes on the Christian symbolism representing the crucifixion of Jesus. And in the late 14th century, you have a monk named Father Thomas Rowcliffe of St. Albans Abbey in Herefordshire. And he began distributing these buns to the poor on Good Friday, cementing their connection to the Easter season. So traditionally, hot cross buns were made with ingredients that had been restricted during Lent, like sugar, like butter, like animal milk. And it made them symbolic, and it made them a celebratory treat to mark the end of fasting. So kind of the other end of Easter, the other end of the Lenten holiday. And so again, pushing it a little bit, but I would say because of its connection with Lent and fasting and Easter and religion and this monk, I think there is a real connection. I mean, today hot cross buns are very different. They're sweetened, they're spiced with raisins, they're topped with icing. They're not this kind of solemn bread that they once were. And now they're available in many places. They're not just available at Easter time. You can find them in the UK. You can find them in, I think really a lot of places, a lot of bakeries, but you will find them much richer today than they would have been as a very simple Lenten fare back hundreds of years ago. But they are connected to religion, so they're going in. They're in the podcast. Okay, let's talk about an iconic Italian Christmas bread that has a rich history rooted in religious tradition, and it absolutely comes out of religious tradition, and that's panettone. Panettone. I have to laugh because I had to stop recording because I don't know if you heard. I don't know if you could hear. I don't think you could, but maybe some really good earbuds might be able to hear the fact that my husband was showering at the time I was recording this. And because we gray watered our plumbing many years ago, the water from our showers go into a barrel. And that barrel is right outside my office window where I record. And I could hear all the water just dumping into the barrel. So I wasn't sure if you could hear that. So I had to pause. So here we're back with panettone. It's just really funny. What the things that hinder podcasters, one of them is water from your gray water. Okay. So its exact origins are debated, but it is likely that panettone emerged in Milan in the 15th or 16th century, and it evolved from earlier customs of baking enriched breads for religious feasts. And enriched breads means there's sugar, sometimes animal products. It just means it's more than just yeast and water. And so panettone became firmly associated with Christmas, with records showing that it was enjoyed in Milanese homes in Milan and at Catholic institutions by the 1500s. There is a popular legend that ties panettone with Saint Blaise, who is said to have healed a choking child with a piece of bread. And so as a result, some Italians will eat leftover panettone on February 3rd, which is his feast day, as protection against throat ailments. I believe that. I grew up Catholic. There's a saint for everything. And Saint Blaise apparently is the patron saint of sore throats. So some interpretations even suggest that its tall, domed shape may symbolize the Holy Trinity. I think everything in Catholicism is thought to resemble the Holy Trinity. So sure, that's probably what some people think. Whatever brings meaning to you, that's fine. Originally, it was a luxury bread made with kind of luxury ingredients like dried fruit, like premium wheat, like sometimes chicken's eggs, and it was reserved for the wealthy and for special religious occasions. So in this case, this is a bread that doesn't come out of fasting, it comes out of decadence, but specifically for religious purposes. And now today, panettone is enjoyed far beyond its Catholic roots. It's a holiday staple, not only in Italy, but across Europe. I have a recipe for panettone. Trader Joe's even sells a panettone. Alas, it contains like dairy butter. So stupid. Just don't use dairy butter. But it's a seasonal treat. You can find panettone. You can make panettone. It's still kind of sold seasonally. But I would say most people know what a panettone is if it's sold at Trader Joe's, for goodness sake. Next, we are going to another food as part of the Christian tradition that absolutely had to do with abstaining from animal products during the Lenten season. And that is something I grew up eating, not because it's part of my cultural heritage, or even in this case, part of my religious heritage, which was Catholic, but because it was a very delicious, convenient food that my mother found in the frozen section, and we ate it all the time, and that was pierogies. It was pierogies. Did y'all have pierogies growing up? I loved pierogies because my mom would get them, kind of frozen, and she would boil them and then fry them. So it was just these amazing fritters, these amazing dumplings that were fried, and it had mashed potatoes and onions inside. So these are treats. They are very nostalgic for me when I think about these, but they were staples in Eastern European cuisine, and specifically in the Christian religious tradition in Eastern Europe. So Russian, Polish, Eastern European heritages, Ukraine would absolutely have grown up eating pierogies. Now, in Poland, they are famously associated, there's another saint association. They're famously associated with Saint Hyacinth, a 13th century Dominican priest. According to legend, during a famine, he encouraged people to make pierogies with the limited ingredients they had, prayed for relief for these people who couldn't get any food, and a miracle followed. Crops flourished, and the famine ended. And so because of this story, pierogies became symbols of provision and hope and faith. More broadly, pierogies were traditionally tied to Christian observances of fasting, especially during Lent, especially in Poland and Ukraine. They were prepared for Lent. And at Christmas Eve in Poland, when Catholics would observe Wigilia, it's probably Vigilia, a meatless feast is what Polish Catholics would have observed, still do in many cases. And common fillings during this time, because they weren't eating animal products, would have been mushrooms or sauerkraut or potatoes. It depends on the time. And then eventually, in some communities in parts of the United States, like Pennsylvania, pierogi making during Lent became part of a church fundraiser, including, volunteers, and became this very traditional thing in places, different churches in Pennsylvania. So pierogies, as I knew them growing up, they definitely felt decadent and definitely felt like comfort food. They have long carried a spiritual and cultural significance, especially in Eastern Europe through Christianity. As does our next featured food, and that is marzipan. Marzipan. Yes, this delicious confection of almonds and sugar. So called mazapan in Spanish. You have a bit of a conflict here because both Spain and Italy claim to have invented this sweet almond paste. Most historians agree, though, that marzipan as we know it today likely evolved from earlier Arabic confections made of almonds and sugar. These nut-based sweets are even referenced in 1001 Nights, where they're described as being used during Ramadan, or even as aphrodisiacs. Now, Spain's version of marzipan is often traced to Toledo, the famous multicultural city where Jews and Christians and Muslims lived together for centuries. According to tradition, the nuns of the convent of San Clemente created mazapan, after the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 during a famine in Castile. They had little wheat, but they had plenty of almonds and sugar. And so the nuns combined the two into a nourishing paste to feed the city's hungry. By 1613, so hundreds of years later, marzipan's ingredients were officially limited to just these almonds and sugar by local ordinance, establishing its modern recipe. So in between, I think there were some animal products added. And in 1613, they said, nope, marzipan by law, and it's actually protected, it's a protected food, is just almonds and sugar. So if you see marzipan that has animal products in them, nope, that is not true marzipan. So by ordinance, by local ordinance. I want to create more ordinances like that. I'm going to start creating ordinances, see if they stick. Now, Italy offers a competing origin story. Now, it's true, marzipan likely came to Italy through Arab influence during their rule in Sicily in the 9th to 11th centuries, when they would have introduced sugarcane and almonds. If you go listen to my podcast episode on Southern Italian cuisine, we talk all about the influence of Arab traders in southern Italy and especially in Sicily. So they would have introduced sugarcane and almonds around this time between the 9th and 11th centuries. And these are the main ingredients in marzipan. The most famous Italian version is called frutta martorana. It's named after a nun, I think. And these are realistic fruit-shaped marzipan. They're beautiful. If you've never seen marzipan shaped into fruits or animals or figurines, just go search online. It's really amazing what you can do with marzipan. It's like super fun to work with. And so these nuns at the Martorana convent in Palermo in the 12th century were creating these fruit-shaped, like an animal-shaped marzipans to decorate their altar when real fruit wasn't available. And so in Italy, it's often called pasta reale, which is royal paste. Pasta being paste, royal paste, because it was seen as a luxurious treat. So marzipan has deep roots in both Spanish and Italian food culture, but specifically in their religious traditions. In Spain, convents were central to marzipan's development, with the nuns creating it during times of scarcity, turning it into a symbolic sweet for holidays like Christmas and All Saints' Day. In Italy, particularly in Sicily, marzipan became part of church celebrations through the artistry of the nuns who were creating these fruit-shaped sweets to decorate altars as part of the religious feasts. And then marzipan spread with Spanish colonial influence. And as it did, it adapted to local ingredients. So in the Philippines, mazapan de pili is made with pili nuts. In Venezuela, cashews are used. But in Spain, mazapan de Toledo remains the most prestigious, protected by DO, designation of origin. And of course, marzipan is enjoyed everywhere around the world today. I love marzipan so much. I actually started playing with a really delicious recipe and making my own marzipan. Like making your own marzipan is like one of the easiest things to do. But that's another story for another day. Before I move on from Christian-inspired foods, and we're almost wrapping up here, I want to just briefly call attention to Advent. It's the season leading up to Christmas. I mentioned that most of the plant-based dishes so far have been mostly inspired by Lent, but Christians did practice abstaining from animal products during Advent, especially in the earlier centuries and in Orthodox and Catholic traditions. I do talk about this in my episode on Advent, but I just want to name a few foods. I'm not going to go through all the details that emerged from that season as well. They might be better known regionally than internationally. Tell me if I'm wrong. One of them is St. Lucia buns from Sweden. These are saffron buns traditionally made on December 13th, which is St. Lucia's Day, for the Festival of Light. And it's often associated with Advent fasting. Please make these. They are amazing. I have a recipe at joyfulvegan.com. Then you have Stollen, which is from Germany. This is a fruit bread originally made without butter, specifically because of Advent fasting rules, until the church issued a special exemption, which is ridiculous. And then you have Panforte, which is also from Italy, like panettone is. This was a dense spiced fruit cake and nut cake from Siena. I talk about this in that episode, and I have a recipe in The Joy of Vegan Baking. This is rooted in the Advent season, and by design, it's made without animal products. So those are just a few I wanted to name as well, even though I kind of go into greater detail about them in the Advent episode. Let's move on, though, to popular foods inspired by Judaism. And we're going to circle back to pancakes. We have, of course, our globally loved latkes, or potato pancakes. Christianity does not have a monopoly on pancake revelry. Latkes are crisp, golden pancakes, traditionally made from grated potatoes, onion, flour, or matzo meal, and they're fried until deliciously browned. I do have a recipe in the vegan table for latkes. They're typically served with applesauce or sour cream, and they've become one of the most iconic foods associated with Hanukkah. Hanukkah, as you probably know, is a Jewish holiday commemorating the Maccabees' reclaiming and rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the 2nd century BC, during a time of Greek-Syrian occupation and religious oppression. The holiday centers on the miracle of the oil, the small amount of consecrated oil that they had enough of for just one day, but it burned for 8. And that's why you have 8 days of Hanukkah. Because of this oil, this consecrated oil that got them through, fried foods like latkes, like donuts, are eaten to honor that miracle. So these beloved pancakes and delicious pancakes are more than just comfort food. They are rooted in history and resistance and celebration. I also mentioned donuts. In the Jewish tradition, they would be called sufganiyot. Please forgive my pronunciation, but these are jelly-filled donuts, and they are traditionally eaten during Hanukkah as well. Jelly donuts didn't originate with this religious observance, but they have become firmly associated with it, especially in modern Jewish communities around the world. And yay for us who also celebrate and commemorate Hanukkah, who can do so with donuts. Yay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So again, donuts didn't come from this observance, but they're very much associated with it. Now, let's move on to another Jewish food that began as part of a religious tradition, and that's challah. Now, I do have an entire podcast episode on Jewish foods and on the plant-based aspects of Jewish food and kind of Jewish food history, which I think is fascinating. So you can go listen to that episode, and I do talk about challah. Now, I don't know if challah is as ubiquitous as pretzels. I'm going to say it's probably not. However, I would argue that challah is absolutely in the broader popular food culture. Now, it was originally baked for Shabbat and Jewish holidays, but it is seen kind of everywhere. You can find it certainly in any Jewish bakery. I think in a lot of bakeries you would find it. It's a beautifully braided, slightly sweet bread. It's an enriched dough, and it is enjoyed by people around the world of many backgrounds simply because it's delicious. It shows up on brunch menus. I think I'm seeing it in a lot of places as a sandwich bread. You'll find it in lots of cookbooks. So I think you're going to see it far beyond Jewish communities, and that's why it deserved a place in today's episode. And like other foods we've already looked at, challah began as a sacred symbol, set apart for ritual, but has since become a beloved part of everyday life for many. And I have a delicious recipe. I didn't realize I had so many recipes from these traditions, but I do have a recipe for challah. You could find it in my store. This is part of, I think, an on-demand class I did where I show you how to braid it. I give you the recipe. You can watch me do the whole video, and that's over in my store, which you can link to from joyfulvegan.com. So the word challah originally referred not to the braided loaf we know today, but to the portion of dough that was set aside as an offering to the priests, as commanded in the Torah. In ancient times, this offering was brought to the temple in Jerusalem, where the priestly class served. Now, the temple was destroyed, of course, during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, but observant Jews still fulfill this mitzvah, this commandment, this deed, this offering, as part of their observation for their religion. And they symbolically separate a small piece of dough when baking, honoring the tradition, even without the physical presence of the temple, which is pretty much the Jewish diaspora in a nutshell. So challah became especially associated with Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, which begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. Shabbat is a day of rest and spiritual reflection, rooted in the biblical creation story in which God rests on the seventh day. Traditionally, 2 loaves of challah are placed on the Shabbat table to represent the double portion of manna that fell from heaven on Fridays, while the Israelites wandered the desert, ensuring they had enough food for both Friday and Saturday without needing to gather it on the day of rest. It's also eaten on Jewish holidays such as Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Sukkot, which is a holiday that commemorates the Israelites' journey through the desert after leaving Egypt. So you have challah as a celebration, as a commemoration, and it is absolutely delightful. I love challah so much. So go check out my recipe or any recipe you can find. Sadly, most challah in most bakeries while the dough might not be enriched with dairy-based butter, though it might be, the top is it often includes an egg wash. So I include a beautiful wash to make it this, glistening loaf that is characteristic of a challah, aside from the braiding, in my recipe. So you can go find that. Now let's move on to another food that is certainly part of our culture everywhere you are. I don't care where you are, how you grew up, or what your religion is, or what your non-religion is, or what your whatever. You, I am sure, love a bagel. You love a bagel. I did talk about this again in the Jewish history episode, but let's talk about it in the context of today's episode. Bagels originated in 17th century Poland, rooted in the Jewish communities of cities like Krakow. They were a variation of a bread that had already existed. It was like a ring-shaped bread that has a long history in Polish culinary tradition. And we have the first written record of the bagel appearing in a 1610 Krakow community ordinance, which notes that they were given as a gift to women after childbirth, a symbolic offering of nourishment and celebration. And so bagels quickly became a staple in Eastern European Jewish life. Their round shape was often interpreted as a symbol of the cycle of life. They're easy to make and boil and bake and transport. And they're perfect for families who are observing kosher dietary laws. And then when you had Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe arriving in North America in the late 19th century, late 20th century, they brought their food traditions with them. And of course, I talk about the diasporatic foods in that episode. But of course, bagels is one of them. So cities like New York, Montreal, bagel making became a craft. And you have these regional varieties, of course, just like with pizza, you have the varietals between New York bagels and Montreal bagels. And I will tell you, it's really fun. There is a bagel shop here I think they're technically in Berkeley, and they won, I think, the New York Times best bagel in the country right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I know my New York listeners, my Jewish listeners, you're probably like, no, not possible. Telling you, they're really good bagels. They're like the New York bagel I grew up with back in New Jersey. And today, bagels are a global phenomenon. They are no longer tied to religious rituals or limited to Jewish communities. They are part of breakfast menus, diners, bakeries, grocery store shelves, cookbooks. They're a perfect example of a dish that maybe, again, didn't start in the Jewish religious context, but kind of close. And now they're a beloved part of everyday life. And I do have a recipe for bagels. I do. In my store under bagels, bread, and biscuits, I have a recipe, and I do a video demonstration for bagels and bread and biscuits. And I think, the next recipe and our last recipe, I do have a recipe for it in the Joy of Vegan Baking. Okay. And that is baklava. And I want to end with baklava, not just because baklava, it's so incredibly delicious and beloved also around the world, but because its origins touch Christianity and Judaism and Islam. It's one of those foods that reminds us how deeply intertwined these faiths once were, especially in medieval Spain, in Al-Andalus, where Muslim and Jewish and Christian communities lived and worked and cooked and ate side by side for centuries before the expulsion of Jews and Muslims in Spain in the 15th century. If you don't know, and how could you not, baklava is a rich, flaky pastry made of thin layers of phyllo dough filled with chopped nuts and soaked in a fragrant syrup. Now, the syrup varies by region. In Algeria, it's orange blossom water. In Iran, it's rose water and cardamom. In Greece, it's honey and lemon. Now, you can also find lots of baklava, some of which will be made with agave. And I have a recipe in the book that uses agave, but you could use a simple syrup, sugar, a simple syrup made from sugar. So it really depends. But the plant-based versions, today, it's an easy swap, but traditionally, and again, it depends on where you are, baklava does not have to be made with honey. Depending on where you are, it would be made with, like I said, this fragrance syrup, depending on the region you're in, or depending on the baklava, the inspiration. So the roots of baklava stretch all the way back to the Assyrian Empire. This is around the 8th century BC. I'm just going to let that sink in. This is how far back baklava goes. The 8th century BC, before the Common Era, where people layered flatbreads. So again, I could do a whole episode just on flatbreads with chopped nuts and honey for special occasions. The ancient Greeks and Romans had their own versions. You're going to not like the name of this, but they called it the placenta cake because Latin placenta comes from Greek plakos, meaning flat cake. But it was called the placenta cake. So if you ever see placenta cake, it's not afterbirth. It's just a flat cake. And these early variations layered dough with honey, sometimes bay leaves, sometimes dairy cheese. But baklava, as we know it today, took shape about 500 years ago in the Ottoman Empire, where it became especially associated with Ramadan. Each year, during the holy month, the Sultan would present trays of baklava to his elite Janissary soldiers in a grand event known as the baklava procession. I want a baklava procession. Are you kidding? So Ottoman Christians then adapted this dish for Lent. Some using 40 layers of phyllo to represent the 40 days of fasting. Some using 33 layers to symbolize the years of Christ's life. And then Jewish communities across the empire began serving baklava on holidays like Rosh Hashanah and Purim, further spreading its meaning and reach. So yeah, baklava is this delicious, flaky, sweet treat, but it is also a testament to centuries of shared tradition, cultural exchange, and culinary creativity across 3 of the world's major religions. And so the dishes I've highlighted in today's episode are just a few examples of this. There are plenty of plant-based foods found in every country and culture and religion. And many are tied to religious rituals or customs, like dates in Islam, right? Traditionally eaten at the evening meal that Muslims eat to break their daily fast during the holy month of Ramadan, symbolically recalling the Prophet Muhammad breaking his fast with 3 dates. That's true. But dates didn't necessarily come from that. They are just included in that. And so what I wanted to spotlight today, that's one example of, there are so many soups, stews, vegetable-based foods that, again, in India, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, where you have all these dishes. I mean, Southern Indian cuisine is pretty much vegan. You go to any adupi is referring to the food that is eaten that's all vegetarian. So Adupi Palace, one of our favorite places in Berkeley, it's all vegetarian because it was a place for monks, Hindu monks, to be able to go and observe abstaining from meat. So you have all of these food traditions. So that's not what I'm talking about today. What I wanted to highlight today were dishes and recipes that emerged out of religious tradition, specific dishes, specifically because members of that faith were, and sometimes still are, abstaining from animal products, or because the food itself played a role in a ritual or a rite. And I'm sure there are many I didn't include. I'm already nearing, an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm sure there are plenty I didn't include. Regional dishes known mostly within specific communities. I'm sure you have haroset at the Passover Seder. You have king cake eaten during Epiphany in many Christian countries. Like, there are very specific foods, but I wanted to talk about the dishes that have moved beyond their original context. I don't think a lot of people eat haroset outside of Passover, even though it's delicious and plant-based and fine. But I wanted to talk about the dishes that moved beyond their original context and became part of the general popular imagination and eating habits, foods like bagels, pretzels, and tofu. These foods are not just meatless, they're meaningful. They carry stories, they reflect values, they have histories, and they remind us that plant-based eating isn't a trend, it's tradition. And I would genuinely love to know about any dishes or foods that are part of your family's cultures, religions, traditions, especially those tied to ritual, reflection, or abstention. Please share them with me. I am always listening and I'm always hungry. I am very hungry right now, especially having talked about all this food and it's nearing lunchtime. And I'm clearly always eager to add new recipes to my repertoire. So that they would come from you and your traditions and your customs in your family would make them even more meaningful. And maybe they'll show up in a cookbook someday. Maybe they'll show up in one of my on-demand classes. So thank you for that. I would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, I hope you can join me in Japan 2026. We had a cancellation of 4 people. Spots opened up very unexpectedly for a trip that until recently was completely full. So I don't think we're doing a spring 2027 trip to Japan. So do not miss out on this opportunity. I promise your fill of ramen and sushi and shojin cuisine and tofu and kaiseki and okonomiyaki. So I hope you can join me. You can check out all of that at joyfulvegan.com. Join me on Substack. I have to go. I have to make that okonomiyaki video, which is taking a long time. I'm a bit overwhelmed. I'm still managing the frustration of creating content that few people see. So promise me you'll watch it, give it a thumbs up, and promise me you'll share Food for Thought podcast. Give it a review. Go subscribe to my Substack. And it's the best way to ensure the survival and the spreading of this work for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.